Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Digital EDU Dialogues podcast. I am host Angela Britcher, and joining me today is Dr. Sheri Hutchinson. Sheri, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I am so excited because we are going to talk about first year experiences. And as someone who has spent a lot of years teaching first year students, I am thrilled to have your expertise and to share this with our listeners today. So we're going to talk about first year experiences. We're going to talk about how we can create programs that really orient students, that encourage students, and ultimately retain students because we want them to have such a positive experience. And we're going to talk about how we can work together as faculty and administrators as we create these approaches. So one of the first things that you and I talked about is how we can use these first year experiences as a tool to empower students. So talk a little bit more about that idea, using these courses as empowerment.
Oh, it's so essential. And having been in higher ed since the late 80s, when like we were talking earlier, it was like, well, when we did registration and we did all of that, it was electric typewriters, student retention and success was something that we had individual attention with each one of the students because I had about 160 students at the time that I worked with. And so even back then, that first year experience, getting to know them, making sure that they felt welcome, getting them involved in their classes, getting the importance of, just working individually with them. And then now with all of the resources and the exciting things that have happened, like I always joke like, oh, I feel like a dinosaur because, I had a computer in college, but most of my friends didn't. And so, now with computers and with our technology and with putting, great funding towards our first year experiences, we have such spectacular opportunities to really um, make better retention, better completion, for students to feel more successful, and more importantly, for students to get really involved in school. Things like putting your funding towards the first year experience is really essential. It's going to be even more important as we go through keeping our federal financial aid in place as well. Also having our, we had talked about before, early alert systems and how important those are. So there's tons of technologies before. At one point it might be that we would actually go walk over, find the students in dorm rooms, go knock on doors, talk to RAs. Those are still great ways to be able to, reconnect with students have disappeared. But we actually have electronic and technologies now that we can have early alert systems and faculty can feel supported that they're paying attention to when the students are missing and doing those really early on relationship building, which are super important. And I always like those beginning of the semester. So as everyone's kind of watching this, they're probably thinking, well, the semester starts again, August, September. What do we do? Well, those events in those early weeks in the semester are so important, especially, like when students maybe have left home, they're getting lonely. We talked about you and I,
Mhm.
you have a teenager, and before long, you're going to probably experience the same thing. And you know how absolutely essential it is to have those activities and events and those co-curricular signups for different, it could be, they're studying Spanish or they're studying, a foreign language and they get involved in a club with that, or their athletics and they get involved in some other volunteer type work, or even involved in school or doing some tutoring because they're really good in math, or maybe they're not good in math, but getting involved in those tutoring events too. That early participation is really essential, and that's what we were kind of talking about before. Things have kind of shifted during this pandemic, where we were really into enrollment and student success, and then now post pandemic we really have been looking at more like retention, completion, and that's where your first year experience becomes so essential.
Yeah, really building those relationships is what sounds so important, between students and between students and faculty. And as you were talking, I was thinking about one of the places I teach. I end up teaching nights there a lot, and the alumni will have food and coffee and sodas available that first week of class at night. So even for those students that are maybe returning students, right? They're adult learners even, coming back into that experience as a first year student in your 20s, 30s, 40s, even, to have just that welcoming and that connection to other people and that sense of community, I think, is so important, whether you're in person or online. Just those moments of building those relationships, so key to making students feel comfortable, feel welcomed, and like, all right, I'm going to be okay, and I want to be here.
Yeah, like even our student senate. So when you start talking about food and food insecurities, and you're leaving an area and all of a sudden you're responsible for all of your own food and you don't realize how expensive all those burgers were. You spend all your money or those types of things. So campuses, as part of their first year experience too, have put in um, basic food support programs. I do remember too teaching, and because they were adults, and if you have that 5 o'clock class or 6 o'clock class, and they went right from work, so it really doesn't, it's not just, sometimes I emphasize that first year experience is really only for the traditional model of you're coming out of high school and you're going to college, but it really crosses all age groups because they're working all day long. You can watch them, they're starting to kind of relax. They've just been at work all day. They're tired. Those evening classes, I would bring things like, as a faculty member, have food and then also get them involved in activities. So I
Mhm.
would have snacks for them in the classes a couple times a week, just because, especially if you had those that go to like 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, and then they're going to be heading out. I always worry about health too, their
Mhm.
blood sugars and all those good things too. So it's really super important that we make the students feel welcome. And as faculty, so when I put on my little faculty hat and having been, professor myself, I know that it's important in that the faculty involvement in those first year experiences and creating those welcoming environments is really important. So when you see some of your really high enrolling programs, you usually need to take a look at the faculty that are involved in that because they're creating a wonderful first year experience. Now, we had some great opportunities too where we would have, and that's typically what I specialized in, was the first year experience of getting that retention of the students, working with them, telling them what was coming up in years 2, 3, and 4, so that, okay, this assignment really relates to this is your foundation skills and this builds. So we always kind of think first year experience, oh, that's like this little separate course that the advisors do. Admissions kind of runs that. You have counselors teaching the class, you have advisors. But really, ideally, as faculty and as a whole campus, you need to know what's happening in that first year experience because the first classes that they have, whether they're gen eds or whether they're actually program courses, are really important to make the students feel connected and to help guide them. So everybody is important within it. Could be community members. When I started talking about food insecurity, we often will involve community members. There will be, companies that will donate, either in cash or they'll actually donate, extra food, and we'll have little separate areas where we could have, things like peanut butter and bread and, you some canned meat even, just some staples and not the dried beans. I always joke with everyone. Everyone thinks, "Oh, put the dried beans out there." No, because if you've cooked with those types of things, those are difficult too. So I always say it's really part of things that you think individual students would actually eat and be able to cook. Because remember, that requires pots and pans and all of those types of things. So at the last campus that I was at last year, that's really what we focused on, was making sure that that whole first year experience really involves students. And it can be things such as, so not only when we talked about community members and their donations and their involvement, what we really looked at too was the spaces within the campus for the first year, cozy nooks, spaces where students would gather. And that's always where there's some food too. That's what we found. There's a cup of coffee there. There's some soda machines. We had, even as part of our first year experience, put in machines where you could get sandwiches out, like a fresh sandwich. So the cafeteria might be closed. you're studying, especially like those nurses, they're studying. We looked at, our cybersecurity specialists. It's just so heavy. Our network engineers, their brains are just racked. And those English professors, they're really just stressing those students out because you gotta write. So I know. That's why I said that. And so having those shared spaces and looking at your campus in a different way, that
Mhm,
first year experience is not just a little box that you put it into,
mhm,
but instead it really involves everyone. So everyone from faculty in the program that are committed, that they even have data and understand how many students are, maybe having issues in a particular course, and can they consider their first year experience. So those introductory courses is really important in making sure that students are all on the same page as they move forward. And those are big things too. And
mhm,
getting them resources. So I talked about community members. You're really looking at your institutions, um, your reputation, your accreditation is really based upon that whole first year experience. Because if you are not successful in retaining those students and getting them through to completion, that does put your financial aid in jeopardy, which then does in
mhm,
turn put your campus in jeopardy. So that's why those first year experiences really end up being so absolutely important for all of us.
mhm. And I appreciate your holistic approach to it, that it's not just first year experience is one class or something admissions does or something student success does. It's something that we're all responsible for and something that we all can be a part of. And one of the things that you and I had talked about when we first met was this idea of getting everyone on the same page about that. If you could talk a little bit about that idea of getting stakeholder buy-in to participating in these programs and co-creating them across your institution and how important that is.
Well, when we were talking about it, we talked a lot about um, faculty really understanding. So we talked about the middle of the semester. I'll start with the middle. I was going to start with the last of the I was going to start backwards. You can always tell an instructional designer because they start backwards. I'm like, oh, let's go to no, let's go in the middle. Let's just kind of follow a sequential order. And so scheduling, like, do you know in your program that all of your students are having midterm semesters? Are they being scheduled like back to back to back to back? Imagine that type of stress. Like when you and I are out working, we don't have, we're not like constantly going through this set of hurdles, so it really does take it takes a lot of networking yourself as faculty to understand, like, okay, in my classes, what other classes are my students taking? Taking and putting together a calendar and kind of figuring out, okay, like here's all my students, here's all the other classes that they're taking. And here's when they said all their other classes are. Should I have all of my assignments, say if it's an online course or it's an in-person course, am I going to have all of their assignments due Sunday at 11:59 p.m.? Just even that of maybe you switch it to Monday evening so they get an
Mhm,
extra day because you know that the majority of your other coworkers, co-faculty, have that type of schedule. So it took a lot, even instructional design, to start saying to faculty, look, figure out when your students have all of their assignments. And so if it's weekly, if it's every other week, maybe you can alternate some of your assignments. And sometimes it's like, could you make that assignment not a super high stake one then?
mhm,
So maybe they have something to do because you want them to continue to reinforce that learning, but maybe you do some alternate and you really figure out when your students' assignments are there and really look at scheduling for that. Because you really want to be flexible for your students. They're just joining college life. They're just getting going. And I always say, don't point the fingers. Don't say, "Oh, well, if they would have gone to XYZ school like I did,
mhm,
they wouldn't be struggling like this." But everybody has different things that they bring to the table. And so each student learns a little bit differently. Each student handles stress differently, just like all the rest of the faculty, the staff, and administration handle stress and deadlines differently. So kind of taking that into consideration and really trying to be flexible with your students. Making sure that you've really taken into account what's happening.
Yeah, and I think listening to students is really helpful too. I've taught in person where I've changed the due date of an assignment. I'm looking at this classroom of faces of 18-year-old freshmen, and I've got engineering students and biology students telling me about this huge exam they have coming up, and it has me think, you know what? Let's bump our work until next week. Like, we're going to work on it in class and let's make it due after that, because I know not only do they need the brain space to complete those tasks that are in their major, but I want to get the best work out of them. And I'm not going to get my best work if they are cramming for an engineering exam, a biology exam in their first semester. And after my first semester of teaching, it occurred to me that everyone has the big assignment due the last week of class. And as an instructional designer, I've designed that way as well. And it made me say, wait, I'm going to back things up. My last week is going to be some type of reflection assignment or something a little lighter. And I'm going to make those big deliverables due a week or two before the last week of class, which means they have to work harder. They're at that last quarter of the class, and they've got to get things done a little earlier than they might have. But I find that I get much better work out of them. Their brains are still functioning, right? They're not totally burned out. They're still feeling creative. They still have the space in their schedule to ask some questions and even to submit something, and then I can give them feedback. And there's a little space for me to say, hey, here's some ways you can make improvements. And since we have 2 weeks left in the semester, feel free to resubmit, revise and resubmit. So really listening to students is what helped me make those adjustments, and seeing that, especially the courses in their, if I'm teaching gen eds, the courses in their majors, that last week is their week. And so if I can reschedule that gen ed work to be done a little bit earlier in the semester, then I know I'm going to get their best work, and they're going to have some ease and maybe even some fun integrating all of their learning in that last week, instead of feeling so stressed out in my class.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. And one of the other things that we didn't talk about is when you have a campus that has athletes. So a
Yes.
number of the institutions that I've been at have athletes. So student athletes have different experiences, and they have a different level of involvement. So as part of that whole first year experience, knowing when the athletes have their competitions is really huge too. So not only for scheduling, but also, for understanding what's happening. And then what's even more huge with that first year experience is attending their events when they're home events. I get you can't travel across the country or across the state, for their competitions, but you can go to their competitions and they notice that you're there. They notice that you're there and you can talk about, oh my gosh, did you guys see the basketball game? Oh my gosh, did you see the football game? Hey, did you go to the women's wrestling? Oh, wow. And then talking about the individual students like that really helps bring that connection. But you have kind of like a twofold with that too. So not all of your students are athletes, but they can then go. So if you've got athletes in your class and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was so excited. Thank you so much for, coming. It was great. My parents can't get here," or, those types of things. Then that also has that double bonus of maybe you can get some of the other students out of that dorm room, out of that I'm lonely
Mhm.
and I'm missing home, or I just feel overwhelmed. They can also go and participate and watch their fellow classmates being able to engage and be excited. And then, they might make some friends. And the more that they make friends and the more that they can engage, they see the faculty are attending, they see other students in the class are attending. I realize that, they also may have to work around, work events or things like that too. But it does even provide, there are extra jobs available then for events. We would have our law enforcement students. So they would be able to work security at our athletic events, which gave them great work experience. How do you deal with, all of that adrenaline with the athletes and, all of the things that, may or may not end up happening afterwards are such good and kind of like safe
Yes.
places to learn those essential skills. So we would have that happen as well too. And that was just a big part of making people understand that, hey, wow, this is important. We've got all of our students involved in our campus and we are a community, and they really do feel that. They really do feel when the faculty attend their events or go to their band concerts. I talked about athletes, but there's a lot of events, or go to their theatrical performances. There's so many different events like that on campus that it's really important for faculty to be able to attend and help students really in that first year.
It's such a great idea that one of my colleagues at one of the schools where I teach, she actually gives extra credit to students for attending certain events. We have like a student run movie program, and she will give her students extra credit if they come on the night that she's going. And she and I will regularly come and bring our families. And I think something that also just really stands out for students is that they get to see us as real people. We're in casual clothes and we're cheering or we're clapping or we're just chatting, and can be really casual. And for me, as I teach online so often, but it's often at schools that are local to me, I'll have students that I might not recognize them, but they recognize me. And I love when they come up and introduce themselves. And so I get to meet them in real life, as the kids say. And, at sports events, theater events, music events, art events. How wonderful it is to, again, build those relationships. And I think that relationship building is so important for their retention. They know we care. They know we're real people. They often get to meet our families. And I think there really is something about seeing us just dressed down and, just being real instead of in professor mode, and holding the space for a classroom. And just instead of having a casual conversation. So I think you're right. It's so important. And I love my colleague's idea of, I'll give you extra credit if you come to movie night on Friday, and even more extra credit if you sell popcorn. So like you said,
There
it's
you
getting
go.
the
See,
students involved is, I think it gives them a reason to really get invested in their program.
I really think that that helps. And they enjoy seeing the administration too. So we talked a lot about faculty and the faculty involvement, but one of the other areas that we hadn't
Mhm.
necessarily talked about was administration and admissions advisors. The more that everybody across the campus who interacts with the students
Yes.
can go. They're not going to be able to go to every, because obviously they have families and
Mhm.
commitments and they're exhausted too. But being able to go even a few times a semester, going to some of the big events like that is really so important to students to see that, oh, my advisor's here, or, oh, look, the dean's here. They're not so scary. Look, they wear jeans. They don't wear suits all the time.
Yes.
Oh, look, the vice president and the president are here. And look, they're cheering, and
Mhm.
they just have sweatshirts on, and t-shirts or things like that, and they look, it gives you that impression that you care about what's happening and that you are involved, and it makes the whole campus into a community, and that's really what we talk about with first year experience. I mean, I keep going back to saying it's not just a class that they take.
Mhm. It's
It's
that
not just learning
holistic.
time management skills. It's learning about life in general, and it's making the campus into an entire community, and that's really what's huge.
All right. One of the things that you and I talked about was this idea of just in time style learning. So whether that's online and kind of having those little homes and hubs that, since our students are so accustomed to working in learning management systems, whether they're in person or online students or hybrid, talk about that idea of that just in time learning and how important that is for students. And then we can even talk about how important that is for faculty.
Oh, yes. You and I had talked about, um, so I work very often with neurodiverse students. So typically on the spectrum. And these students, it can be horribly overwhelming. They'll have for online, because you talked about online. And so one of my students that I was working with, it was just absolutely overwhelming for the student to finish the orientation to be able to register for online classes. And I'm like, well, how bad can it be? Like, okay, so let's just schedule a Zoom session and let me just see what this looks like. Because, oftentimes as faculty, we don't have access to the orientation. Nobody has shared with us. And until we get into a situation like this, and it was a huge chore. I mean, we sat for like 3 or 4 hours and it was a download. It was a download of everything that you would ever need to know. Stuff that you didn't even know. It's like it wasn't even put into an order of, like we talked just about time, just in time. Um, it wasn't even in like, okay, in the first 2 weeks, we have the ad drop date. This is what's important. This is the time for you to do this, why it's important. I mean, it literally was a download of absolutely everything and anything. It's like you dumped the whole kitchen sink and emptied the refrigerator too. And that really, I mean, it's great to have access to all of it at once. I can understand that you have a course that has it organized, but what if you organize that into the first 2 weeks, first 4 weeks? Because I know somewhere in the middle of that semester, somewhere about 6, 7 weeks, it's where, oh my goodness, I am so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Wouldn't that be a much better time to talk about stress and anxiety and, you know, start like here's some events that are upcoming and they're planned and they're strategically planned around the cycle of like we both talked about the fact that we live in places, well, it's a little cold. So, we kind of, the sun starts to get less and less, the daylight's less and less and less. And you can kind of watch the participation in classes. If after, so many years of doing this, you can watch the participation go down. What if we actually planned more of just in time? We looked at the events that we had. Obviously, when it comes to athletic events, they're going to be scheduled slightly differently. But, even career fairs and exciting events. I mean, silly nonsense that, just gets people engaged. Food thing, barbecue club. Barbecue club always would have that. Was started because one of the faculty loved to barbecue and he thought that that would really engage the students. So those were planned just when things were kind of like getting a little blasé, when
Mhm.
students needed it. So they would plan those events too. So any of those kind of events, plus the information that goes out to students. Now with all the technology that's available, I mean, I'm a constantly in love and falling more in love with products like, this isn't a plug for them, but your tools that are like a Salesforce
Mhm.
where it can be automated. So you can have messages that go out at certain times of the semester. So when it's add drop, that there are reminders that go out and they go out in text messages. They go out in email because we know that the students, another email is difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult for them to check, but it goes out in the learning management systems. It goes out faculty then, can post it. Faculty get those announcements and say, please let your class know that we're at add drop. Because faculty forget too.
Right. And a lot of times we're teaching in multiple locations, or we're teaching and we have another job. And I think, wait, when is ad drop at this place? Wait, when is ad drop there? And or this, even sometimes at the same institution, I've got a 7-week class and a 14-week class. So keeping track of all of that is challenging. And so getting those reminders is so helpful. And I think just essential so that we can support our students when they need it, and that they're not going to have to look for it and we're not going to have to look for it in a big website management system SharePoint site, that it's at our fingertips and available to us, or even hand delivered to us in an email or an announcement or in a text message. And like you said, students, if we want their attention, we need to text them.
We do. We need,
That's their
and we have the
language.
technology now that we can make it so much easier.
Mhm.
And even like our whole Microsoft products even can have emails that are automatically scheduled. We can do that within, our learning management systems can automatically send out messages. They can, post messages to them as soon as they open up the LMS, things can pop up now. There are so many of these opportunities that we have to really break apart what's needed. I mean, you can package it all together because I know everyone wants to make sure, oh, I haven't forgotten anything. But then you can also begin to distribute it as you go along,
Mhm. I
as it's needed. So if it's finance information that needs to go out, give some finance information. Give it in little nuggets. If you're trying to teach them how to balance checkbooks, if you're trying, and not that anyone uses a checkbook, but I'll use that as an example, trying to balance their accounts, trying to figure out how much money they have each month. What if you sprinkle that all throughout the semester? Hey, you should be able to have XYZ, like if you're doing a job, what if instead of just downloading everything to students, you broke it into very small segments? If it's a video, maybe you send out videos that are 2-minute videos or 1-minute videos that just talk about one little tiny thing that they can do today. And I mean,
Mhm.
how many of us have subscriptions to like motivational sayings and quotes? Why not use the information that we have and the knowledge that we have? I mean, let's talk English. Wouldn't it be awesome if you took little tiny chunks like that and sent it out to your students?
Mhm.
Maybe little grammar tips. What if you became the Grammarly? What if you taught them little tips and tricks in Grammarly? What if you taught them tips and tricks in your AI, your artificial
Mhm.
intelligence? Because that was one of the other things that we were going to talk about too,
Mhm.
was we were going to kind of talk about how can you harness the technologies that students have access. And I don't know about you, but Monday was pretty exciting for those of us that are Apple folks, because
Mhm.
now there's another, Apple product that's coming out that, those phones that they're constantly connected to and probably take your class on.
Yes.
I've had students that that's their only computer.
Mhm. Yes.
I mean, it really is. That's their only computer because they don't have an opportunity to get to class. So if that's their computer, what a great way to be able to toss those little items out where you're changing behaviors. You're sending those reminders that, the texts, the emails, you're trying to give them little carrots, little incentives. If you show up for this event because you know that it's going to help them socialize, because at that event, you might also be sprinkling in some things like those time management. There's nothing more boring than sitting and learning about time management. And you're like, okay, this is really great, but I can't really apply it.
Yeah.
But if you do those just in time moments and you're showing them, like, okay, this is why we talked about putting together a study schedule. That was one of the big things I think we had talked about before too, with the whole just in time too, was putting together a study schedule. Well, what if you can't put together a study schedule? But you could talk to your friend, like your Chat GPTs, your Gemini, any Microsoft's Copilot, and have it help you make a schedule and help you understand. What if you started teaching students how the technologies can be useful for them? I think that would really make a big difference. And I think that's really how you're going to be able to, because you're really trying to change their behaviors.
Mhm.
You're trying to get them to study, you're trying to get them to join clubs. You're trying to get them to be engaged, and then ultimately that's where your retention comes from, is because they just love you so much, they don't wanna leave. And we do get
Yeah.
that.
We do, and thank you. I love those ideas too. I'm like, wait, I need to make sure I jot these down later. Like, wait, I'm going to play with this. Like, I want to plug my syllabus into Copilot and see if it'll give me study ideas. I just aren't even
Yeah.
thinking about my teenager as a summer project. Like, oh, we should plug this assignment in and spit out some due dates to map this out. So, what a fantastic idea! And again, that we're not doing it. Like, I'm not going to do it for my students, but empowering them. Here, use this tool and make it work for you. And how many times I say that to them when we're talking about AI is, yeah, let's experiment with it, but then you need to edit and you need to make it your own voice and you need to make it yours and make it work for you. So I really like that idea of empowering them to use these tools. And I think it speaks to how we are speaking their language and we are using their tools and helping them prepare for their futures, because they're going to need these tools when they take the next steps in their career as well.
I saw for faculty some really great development if individuals are in the California community college system. So they have, I believe it's called the coaches, and I think it just is a play on the word of the CC1. They have Friday workshops, and in some of their Friday workshops that I was watching recently, they had faculty getting together and exchanging ideas and creating apps. So what you're talking about right now is really like one of the apps that they were actually working on creating. They had an open API, and I don't remember which it was, but they actually had their own little sandbox, they were calling it, or play yard or something like that. And in that, they were building all these wonderful apps that could help students be able to do many of the things that we just talked about. So I think we're really going to see some dramatic changes for first year experience with some really super exciting apps that we can create really easily, or things that we can have our students do in that first year in each of our classes that will help them get a really good, plan of here's how I can manage my time. So I really see that our first year experiences are going to be doing some serious changes. So besides using all the technology that we have, our early alert systems, besides using the other technology products that we have, whether it's our learning management systems or our customer relationship management systems, any of those, um, we also can come right down to this, that we can individually, as faculty, as administration, encourage the use of technology for the greater. I mean, that's where our success in retaining students and getting them across the finish line to graduation is huge. The more that we can get complete, it's going to be huge for us.
Mhm. I agree. And so, to kind of bring everything together, we have talked about the importance of the holistic approach to first year experiences, how important it is that faculty, administration, that we are all playing a role in this and in encouraging our students and in connecting with them and building community. We've talked about the importance of having the learning they need at their fingertips when they need it. And we talked about using technology and how we can use technology and how we can empower our students who are already using technology to use that as a force for good to help them with their study habits, help them, to me, with creativity, and to get them across the finish line. Is there anything else that you want to add today, Sheri, or that you think is really important that we talk about?
Well, my only thing is, everyone that ends up watching is, sometimes they walk away feeling like, oh my goodness, that seems like such a huge task. Or, oh my goodness, what is this going to cost me? Am I going to have to go out and get some special software? I popped off a couple. I tried not to, like direct anybody, but I've seen some really great opportunities. So if there are budgets, there is technology available for you to get this going faster. But then for those who are like, okay, there's no more money in the budget, the president said we can't do this, but we've got to retain it, then remember that grassroots. And that's why I really talked about having those sandboxes and those shared faculty development spaces and administration shared, and advisors, admissions, giving them time and understanding that there's a lot of free or very low cost ideas that you can do so that you can get started. Because remember, the more that you can get retained and to completion, the more likely you are going to get more people to enroll, because it's going to improve your reputation. It's going to be a great place that people want to go to. What is it? Because you've got all the marketing background too. What is it? One person influences, is it 10 or
Mhm.
20 individuals? So if you are struggling with enrollment, maybe the first year experience is one of the big things that you need to embrace. And you can start from grassroots if you have to. But if you've got technologies, I would say invest more in those technologies that you have and make them work for you, but don't rely just on the technology. Remember, the human element is really huge. I mean, it's great to sit with our phones and have our new friend AI talk to us. It's great. We can have wonderful, fabulous conversations with the robots. But in the end, the real connection and what's going to keep our students is our own engagement with students.
That just sounds like a perfect place to end.
It
Sheri,
does.
so much for joining me today. I appreciate all of your ideas and look forward to being part of improving first year experiences.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Your
This
stu
episode of DigitalEDU Dialogues is brought to you by the BAB Group. The demands for teaching and online learning are constantly evolving. Don't get left behind. Carve out a competitive edge and give students engaging learning experiences with support from the BAB Group's team of course design experts. As experienced online faculty and instructional designers, the BAB Group knows how to craft those aha moments for students and meet outcomes for every modality, online, hybrid, and face-to-face, creating engaging, welcoming, and inclusive learning spaces for students of all ages and abilities has never been more important. Discover how the BAB Group can help you by visiting their